Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service in partnership with Alaska Public Media on this Saturday, February 19th. We're going to jump right into it. A lot to talk about. We've had some recent avalanches and the mitigation efforts that are underway. A pretty good avalanche occurred in Turnagain Arm on Friday morning and early afternoon. Talk about that in just a moment. Drier and cooler weather is expected across the southeast panhandle the remainder of this weekend into early next week. A nice break for them after a very wet period over the past couple of weeks, especially earlier this month. Warmer and wetter weather, though, is going to spread north and eastward across western and southern Alaska late this weekend and especially early and middle part of next week. We're going to get temperatures above freezing. With some 40s creeping upward through Cook Inlet into the lower Mat-Su Valley. There could even be some lower 50-degree readings possible along, say, from Kodiak Island along the Alaska Peninsula as we go through Monday and Tuesday. Well, here's an image from Turnagain Arm along the Seward Highway on Friday morning. There was a avalanche that closed the road for several hours up until early afternoon, and further mitigation efforts were underway later in the day and as well as today, because the avalanche threat will remain elevated, and especially if we can get some more precipitation along with these milder temperatures through the early and middle part of next week. Other slides were reported on the Richardson Highway near Summit Lake, as well as on the Old Glen Highway near the Old Connect River Bridge. So be aware of that, especially if you're going out in the backcountry where avalanches can be a hazard. Hazardous weather conditions, though, we have wind chill advisories remain in effect for the northwest coast tonight into Sunday morning, and a winter weather advisory overnight into Sunday morning there for the Dalton Highway in the vicinity of Adigan Pass for blowing snow. The areas in orange, though, are winter storm watches, and those are in response to this system, this frontal system that's going to be working its way through the west side and then southern parts of the state later this weekend and into early next week. We have high wind warnings in effect for the central and eastern Aleutians, including Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, as a result of this powerful low lifting its way across the central Aleutians into the central Bering on Sunday. South-southwest winds could gust as high as 75 to 80 miles an hour. That's hurricane force. Well, looking at the webcams, Dutch Harbor this afternoon, pretty quiet, mostly cloudy, 48 degrees, flirting with 50. That milder air is going to be riding northeastward up along the Alaska Peninsula. And Heidelberg in the southeast finally enjoying a break. A little drier conditions, partly sunny and 42. Though over the weekend, with the breaks in the cloud cover, there could be a little patchy light fog developing in the early morning hours across portions of the panhandle and the inner channels. Otherwise, precipitation, relatively light precipitation will be breaking out on Sunday afternoon across the southwest up toward Nome there in the Seward Peninsula, and then look at it expand on Monday ahead of a frontal system. We expect some pretty decent amounts of precipitation either side of the Alaska Range on up through Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley, as well as along especially the windward side, the east side of the Kenai Peninsula, and then Kodiak Island. And looking at the satellite imagery, just a little interference right there to start, but you see that some breaks there in the cloud cover over the panhandle out over the northern Gulf. But as we go back through Bristol Bay, the lower Kuskokwim Delta, southwestward through the central Aleutians, there's a stream of moisture working its way up from the North Pacific, and that is the harbinger of the next low that'll be deepening. We have one low right now this afternoon to the west, southwest there of Shimia. And then by late tonight, early Sunday morning, the next low appears just south of the central Aleutians with a warm front arcing into the southwest coast. That's going to trigger a band of snow that lifts northward toward the Seward Peninsula as Sunday afternoon and evening unfolds. We see that low deepening into the 970s millibar, and that's when we expect some strong south winds gusting as high as 75 to near 80 miles an hour across portions of the central and eastern Aleutians. That's why that high wind warning is in effect. Meanwhile, high pressure builds over the northern Yukon, and it will tend to develop southeastward across West Canada as that low pressure lifts northeastward toward the Bering Strait and weakens, and it forces the frontal system further inland across the west into the interior. Out ahead of the front, warmer air is streaming northward along the Pacific and Gulf side of the Alaska Peninsula, and that's going to force warmer air up through Cook Inlet. So we could see some temperatures in the 40s by early and middle parts of next week, all the way up to Anchorage and, say, Wasilla and Palmer. Looking at lows Sunday morning, generally below freezing in the Panhandle, except for the outer areas such as Sitka. Temperatures will be initially cold due to some early nighttime clearing, but the warmer air and clouds will be arriving from the southwest Sunday afternoon. Should get temperatures back up near freezing Anchorage, but look at that, in the 40s, 44 at Kodiak, 40 King Salmon south and westward. And then temperatures Monday morning will continue to be steady to slowly rising. We'll see highs off to the west, 30s to near 40 degrees, whereas the Panhandle morning lows will be below freezing. And look at come Monday afternoon, we expect highs generally back up above freezing in the outer areas of the Panhandle, and definitely above freezing. 33 probably isn't warm enough for Anchorage, 44 easily in Kodiak, and as I said, warmer temperatures off toward the south and west. Looking at the northern portions of the state, some 20s and 30s below, coldest there along the North Slope Arctic coast. Temperatures moderate single digits above zero there along the middle lower Yukon Valley. And then Monday morning lows are still looking at lows 20s to some isolated 30s below there along the North Slope, eastern Alcan border around the Yukon Flats. The temperatures creeping upward, and look at by Monday afternoon it could be up near 30 degrees at Nome, and as we go further southward. And here looking at the Alaska Peninsula, temperatures will be creeping upward above freezing. Morning lows generally above freezing across the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians, getting back up into the at least lower, some middle 40s on Sunday afternoon. And Monday morning, notice temperatures not falling along the southwest coast, even up there at Bethel, holding out near freezing. And then for Monday afternoon, I think temperatures in a few areas there in the southwest interior could be approaching 40 degrees, with 40-degree readings common along the length of the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. And looking further ahead, the rest of the month into the beginning of March, March 1st, look at the center of where the greatest likelihood of above normal temperatures are forecast over much of the state, but centered on the southwest along and just west of the Alaska Range. If this does come to pass in this time frame between now and the beginning of March, we could see some temperatures in the 40s, and that's away from the coastal areas of the Alaska Peninsula. And then precipitation will continue to average above normal, especially centered on south central areas, including Cook Inlet, Anchorage area, Prince William Sound, and Kodiak.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, let's take a look at your aviation weather here for the late weekend, Sunday into early next week, Monday. And the main weather player is going to be an area of low pressure, strong low pressure system working its way across the western half of the Aleutians on up into the central Bering. And this feature is going to produce storm force winds with a potential for hurricane force gusts across the central and eastern Aleutians, tip of the Alaska Peninsula, and then out over a good portion of the southeastern part of the Bering Sea, including upward to St. Paul and potentially even along the outer southwest coast. We have widespread IFR conditions there along the southwest, extending back out in the Bering and Aleutians as a result of frontal systems that are going to be pushing a lot of moisture and warmer air northward. Sunday afternoon, we expect widespread IFR conditions along the west arm of the Alaska Range, Bristol Bay on up through the YK deltas, all the way up to St. Lawrence, as well as along the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. And on Monday, we expect the areas of IFR to creep farther northward and spread further eastward inland. And then on Monday afternoon, we see widespread IFR conditions all the way from the south side of the Brooks Range and through much of the lower half of the Yukon River Valley, along the central western Alaska Range into the Alaska Peninsula, also up into the western Gulf, even to Prince William Sound, and as far west as back towards St. Matthew and St. Lawrence Island. Pass conditions on Sunday, Anaktuvuk Pass will hold on to VFR conditions, as will Adigan And then further south and west, in response to a frontal system lifting northeastward, Lake Clark and Merrill will be IFR. Rainy Pass will see MVFR conditions become IFR on Sunday. Windy Pass should be able to hold on to VFR conditions during the daytime, at least daylight hours of Sunday. And Isabel Pass will see MVFR conditions in the morning give way to VFR conditions. Mentasta Pass should generally hold on to VFR conditions throughout Sunday. Tanita Pass will see VFR conditions give way to MVFR conditions. And then Portage Pass as well will see VFR conditions in the morning giving way to MVFR conditions. And then out in the Panhandle, much of the Panhandle enjoying some drier, quieter weather. Look for VFR conditions there on Sunday. In the northern Panhandle at Chilkoot and White. Well, here are the freezing levels. Sunday morning we'll see two 4,000-foot freezing levels creeping up there to around Nunavut Island and St. Matthew along the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, and as high as just above 6,000 feet there, the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. The greatest threat for icing will be along the southwest coast, the YK deltas back out over the Bering and then wrapping around the low back down through especially the central and eastern part of the Aleutians. Generally down further south, deeper in the warmer air between 6 and 16,000 feet there, the eastern Aleutians and tip of the Alaska Peninsula. As we go aloft 30,000 feet jet stream level, we see an anticyclonically curved jet feature. Ridge of high pressure extends from the North Pacific. The axis runs up to just west of Kodiak Island into the southwest part of the state. On the east side of this ridge, we have winds upwards to 140 knots on the outer side of the Panhandle, and then on the west side of the ridge, winds upward to 125 knots from the southwest over the eastern Aleutians. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, we see a core of 55 to as high as 80 knot winds working their way through the eastern half of the Aleutians up through the tip of the Alaska Peninsula on up into the southeast Bering Sea. And dropping down to 3,000 feet, we then see that core of wind is well in place there over the southeast Bering, just north of the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, with winds from the southwest upwards to 70 knots. So obviously that is going to translate to a lot of turbulence. Certainly expect severe turbulence there out over the southeast Bering, into portions of the central and eastern Aleutians up through the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, generally between the surface and 3,000 to 4,000 feet. But in the southwest, anywhere near terrain, we could see that turbulence extend a bit higher up into the atmosphere. And then also there across the Brooks Range, the south and west side of the Brooks Range, there could be some moderate turbulence, the surface to 4,000 feet. So that does it for your flight weather. If you are heading out, check the latest conditions and forecast, and if you can get out, have a safe flight.
When you think of a national park, you probably envision wide open natural spaces undisturbed by human activity. There are indeed such places, but even in some of the most remote areas of a place like Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska, the mark of man is present. Marine debris is a menace to the farthest reaches of our globe, and even designated national park lands are not immune. In the summer of 2009, the Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance, a grassroots conservation organization based in Seward, Alaska, decided to do something about the marine debris fouling the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park. Marine debris coordinator Tim Johnson had first-hand experience with the issue.
The summer before, my wife and I, Michelle, had done a paddle from Seward, sea kayak paddle from Seward to Homer. Really, our eyes were open to some areas that we didn't realize there was so much accumulation. It was very deceiving up front. You couldn't really get a feel for the extent and impact of it. You've got this nice high tide line that's quite pristine, and you really don't get a picture for the impact, the amount of debris in that area until you get behind those storm berms. You get back into the lagoons and the vegetation around those lagoons. And then you see the absolute extent back into that veg and how intertwined and enmeshed these decades of trash deposition. So we were just appalled by that and said we got to get something together on a larger scale.
The Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance is a local nonprofit community organization, and they have been instrumental in helping the Park Service obtain funding to get larger boats to help move the debris, and they get volunteer labor and organize the work trips. And so it's really a partnership between the Park Service and the community to help get out and really get a project done that in and of itself any one group couldn't do on their own.
Most of that trash was baggable. However, there were large items, huge, piles of hauser line, for example, that we just had to hoist up onto the boat.
The volunteers didn't just bag, haul, and hoist the garbage, but also carefully recorded what types of debris were collected.
In many ways, the debris itself is a resource. Archaeologists use middens, the trash heaps, as a way of analyzing past cultures. And in one sense, marine debris is a form of a midden. It's a trash heap that left for the future would be something that people could use to analyze our culture. It may not say the best things about our culture or everything that we want, but we need to be able to document what we've done so that we can preserve that legacy, make sure that we as a society don't forget what we've been doing.
We had two larger categories of marine debris that we picked up. Commercial fishing means like, say, gill nets, large hauser lines, anything that would be associated with more of a commercial fishing scale. And then the second category was more recreational fishing and household, which would be general plastics, things like that. So we had about a 75% of the commercial fishing marine debris element, and about 25% of the recreational and household further out the bay. And we had the exact opposite the closer we got to Seward. Within the bay, it was about 25% commercial fishing versus 75% recreational fishing and household.
The trash is not just unsightly for park visitors, but also poses threats to wildlife and marine habitat.
Really one of the larger issues now that you go to this plastic that can really get into the food web and affect the food web differently than something like glass.
These substances, for instance, all these polystyrene blocks that are breaking down into all these little crumbly bits are further breaking down on a microscopic level, and how much of an impact that has, in this ecosystem is yet to be determined, but I think it's got pretty high potential.
Well known that sea turtles will eat plastic bags floating in the water. They look like jellyfish to a sea turtle, and obviously a plastic bag doesn't go well in the digestive system of a turtle. Albatross will see small pieces of plastic floating on the surface and think they're small fish and other food sources and eat that in their stomachs, especially in some of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. They'll find dead albatross that have starved to death with a full stomach, and it's full of pieces of plastic.
we're affecting our local areas this way, but we need to be thinking about it from more of a state and a global, international scale. And most importantly, to try and focus on prevention of it coming in the first place. Because we're just going to see this continuing, to build up on our beaches unless we're able to get a little bit more of an approach on prevention on the front end.
Marine debris is really a global problem, in all the oceans, and there are many different sources. Global shipping is one. Fishing debris from commercial fishing, recreational boating activity on land, stuff blowing off land, washing down streams, people just throwing stuff on the shore.
Though the problem can seem overwhelming, Johnson remains upbeat about making a positive difference.
No, you gotta start locally. You gotta take control of what you can do, and make something with that, and try and move on from there.
Overall, more than 9 tons of debris was removed from the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park and transported back to Seward to be deposited in a landfill.
People gave a lot to the project in order to make it happen. That was awesome. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. Being able to put that large of a group of volunteers together, dedicated volunteers to put that much effort and give that much time and pull all the different agencies together to see it all happen was incredible. It was incredible. Yeah, very fulfilling experience.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and we're going to start with the sea ice edge. Here's the image from a few days ago on the 17th of February. And as I step it through the 18th, yesterday Friday, and now today Saturday, we see through Cook Inlet the ice retreating and reducing there a bit, as well as the edge there, a southern extent there in the Bering Sea. And with the stronger southwest-south flow that's going to set up across especially the eastern half of the Bering here with this stronger system in front that moves through, we do expect the ice to retreat a bit northward here, and there are going to be milder temperatures, especially across the southwestern portion of the state, Alaska Peninsula, the southwest interior back through Cook Inlet. But for the far southeast in the Panhandle, quieter weather over the weekend. Offshore flow could gust to 45 knots down Lynn Canal with 30-knot north winds, and a bit choppy waves, 5-6 feet there. And in the inner channels, outer coastal areas, look for northeast to north flow, 15 to 25 knots, waves generally 8 to 10 feet. By Monday, continue to see north to northeast winds there across the inner channels. Maybe some gusts upwards to 40 knots there around Petersburg. Waves 5 to 6 feet northern half, 3 feet down toward Ketchikan. And generally more of an offshore flow along the Gulf side, 15 to 20 knots, and waves 6-7 feet. For the northwest portion of the Gulf, we see winds northerly in Prince William Sound, 10 knots, waves a couple of feet. Offshore northwesterly from the Kenai, 20 knots there, 6-foot waves. And then down along Cook Inlet, winds will be northeast north at about 10 to 15 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet where there is open water, especially from Anchor Point southward. And then by Monday, winds will be picking up at the mouth of Cook Inlet to 35 knots from the southeast. And Prince William Sound, look for winds out of the east at around 20 knots. Generally, the open waters of the Gulf southeasterly, 25 to 30 knots, waves 6 feet. For Kodiak Island, winds will be southwesterly, 20 to 25 knots, but as we go down the length of the Alaska Peninsula, winds will pick up from the southeast to 35-knot gales, and waves 15 feet there south of Sand Point. As we look into the day on Monday, winds will generally be more southerly on the North Pacific Gulf side, 25 to 30 knots, waves 10 to 14 feet. And on the Bering side, southeast to south winds 15 to 25 knots, and where there is open water there out toward north of False Pass and Cold Bay on the Bering side, 10-foot waves. Real action Sunday has to do with the low crossing through the central Aleutians. Ahead of it, southeast to south winds 50 to 55 knot storm force winds with gusts as high as 75 knots, so that's over 80 miles an hour potentially there and through the eastern Aleutians Sunday afternoon. So be aware of that, but things do come down quickly there by Sunday night and Monday. Generally south winds around 30 knots, the eastern half, the Aleutians, and southeast to southerly gales 35 to 40 knots west of Atka through Adak and Kiska. On Sunday, as low pressure emerges into the central Bering, we do expect east to southeast winds over the ice, pulling it north and a bit westward. These wind speeds 30 to 40 knots, as high as 45 knots. Southerly winds there off of St. Paul, St. George, with waves building to near 20 feet. Monday, continue to look for southeast winds there, Norton Sound turning more southwesterly to 45 knot gales. So again, the ice retreating more northward on Monday. And then the outlook for the Arctic coast, winds will be generally out of the east at 20 knots. That'll extend down along the northwest coast to Cape Lisburne and pick up to 25 knots out of Kotzebue Sound in the lower Chukchi Sea and upwards to 40 knots off the west side of the Seward Peninsula. And on Monday, winds will be generally out of the southeast across the entire region, 25 to 30 knots from the northwest coast and the Arctic coast, Utqiagvik to Kaktovik, but then 35 to 40 knot gales, the lower Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait and on the north side of St. Lawrence Island and the west side of the Seward Peninsula. Quick check of the weather map. High pressure centered up over the northern Yukon, 1046 low, a deepening low just south of the central Aleutians, 982, and by Sunday afternoon that low will deepen below 980 millibars, with those strong storm force winds with hurricane force gusts possible across the eastern and central Aleutians. Push of warmer air is going to result in some heavier snows up there up toward the Seward Peninsula into the southwest interior, and that will spread inland with mild temperatures surging up Cook Inlet as we head into early and middle part of next week. That does it for the show. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.